I'll do my best, and let me know. I'm not gonna talk too loud because I don't wanna get shut down by people complaining, so just let me know if this audio level is okay, and obviously, backgrounds and shadows suck, but really don't have much of a choice because I wanna be away from the door. Just let me know audio is okay, and I will start and go as fast as I can because I need to sleep. Okay. Hello, everybody. And if I ignore your comments, it's just because I want to go through everything quick, but it's a lot of stuff. So, Soul Conference was today, started at 9 o'clock this morning. It was like between two and 300 people. It was packed. And I met a lot of people on Twitter I've never met before. I met other people who I know and have not met in person. I talked with Brian Bender, who used to write for Politico and who I've battled with a lot on Twitter. But we had a great conversation. So it's always nice to meet people and any problems you have dissipate. Micah Hanks, we battled a little bit. We talked. That was great. Met Chrissy Newton. I met a lot of people. Anyway, let me get to this because I want to not fall asleep, but I'm doing this. So Nolan started out. He's like, we're here to professionalize this subject. And he's surprised by so many tech level and high level individuals trying to legitimize and professionalize this. I don't know if he was talking about in the audience, but anyway, Peter Scoffish, hopefully I'm pronouncing his name right. He said, we have government people here in the audience, and we have dialogue with government people here, and we're not going to be sharing any classified information, obviously. Up first was Avi Loeb. Loeb, I didn't really expect, I've seen him speak and do interviews a lot, so I didn't really expect to really enjoy it, but it was good. Um, he's like, I truly hope we have a partner out there. I truly hope we have a partner out there in interstellar space. Um, he mentioned Steven Weinberg, who said, the more we understand the universe, the more it looks hopeless. But then Avi's like, well, with love, and the universe, if you find a partner, suddenly the universe no longer will be lonely. And he's like, the one key word about today is interstellar, and talks about how many meteors might be rocks, but maybe some, maybe a tennis ball from a neighbor. That was his analogy. And it's like, my colleagues say, everything in the sky must be stones. And Avi calls that the stone age of science. He talks about three interstellar objects discovered over the past decade. 2014 watermelon-sized meteor that hit Earth. 2017 Oumuamua. Is that natural, artificial? Could it be a broken piece of a Dyson sphere? That was one of his speculations. And then 2019, hundreds of meters. It was a meteor. I don't know if that's how large it was, hundreds of meters. And he's like, no anomalies were found. 2014 is the object. He said watermelon sized. That's the one where they found the spirals, and they went to the bottom of the sea and they picked up a whole bunch of them. We'll get to that. So the first two could be of technological origin. We're just asking the question. And he's like, why is bullying in this field, when you're looking into this, more prevalent than a childlike curiosity? He doesn't understand why his colleagues are so nasty on this. Then he showed video of the Galileo project, their instruments, and they've been getting data for over a month. And he wants it to eventually be automated where they don't need humans, and find out if there's something unfamiliar in the sky. He says, made in China is boring to me. I want to see it say made in an exoplanet far away. And they need more funding to make copies of their observatory instruments so they could place it all over the place. Obviously, the goal would be all over the world. They don't have the funding for that, so they have the one right now. And they're looking for potential, also besides UFOs, he's looking for potential interstellar objects. They've published 8 papers. 43 diary reports on his expedition he went. I think it was Papua New Guinea, right? Um, for the object that was discovered in 2014, which was the size of least of a watermelon. He said he goes, I'm a theoretical physicist, but nobody else wanted to look, so I did. And the DoD had this error box that shows where the object fell within 7 miles, give or take, and that's where they looked. And he described how they collected the particles that came off of this object, broke off from the friction of entering the atmosphere, and they were millimeter sized spirals. And they found 50 of them at first. He said he was running on the ship and he was asked by a producer if he was running away or towards something. He said, I'm running away from some of my colleagues who have very strong opinions without evidence, and I'm running towards a high intelligence in interstellar space. They made 26 passes over the 7 mile area. It talks about somebody who said this about the Israeli Hamas battle. They said, love the aliens, but it's really not about aliens. It's about us. Love each other, especially people who are different. Now, he brought the spherules that he collected to be studied by a mass spectrometer at Harvard by Mr. Jacobson. Didn't get the guy's first name. And now they have 800 spherules, and they've studied about 93% of them. Some of them are spheres inside spheres, small spheres solidified first. And he showed some pictures, and he found the iron isotope had a different ratio than rocks on Earth, Earth, Mars, or the moon. Some spherules, he called them Belau, show that they were associated with an explosion, maybe a meteor. And if any of this doesn't make sense, it's because my notes aren't perfect and I'm a little tired. And I'm off balance. Let's see. Folks, so the paper or the article that just came out claims that what these are, they're coal ash. They basically ripped apart his research and explained, they said, this is all coal ash is what he collected. He said, but these spirals were magnetic. Coal is not. It's not coal ash, he said. A lot of people are cheering and saying, the problem is solved. Avi is a fool. I added that last part. And he says, to me, it's very sad to see that because it shows how disinformation can propagate even on matters of science. He talked about this blogger who hasn't published a paper in 10 years. And Avi said, this guy is proud of his incompetence. I don't give a damn about what he says. It's all about paying attention to the data. He says this interstellar expedition was risky, didn't know they were going to find spirals. The next expedition, visit the site again and try to find bigger pieces. So follow the evidence. These are his guiding principles. Follow the evidence by collecting data with state-of-the-art instruments that are under control and are well calibrated. Listen to eyewitnesses, but let's see what I said here. Listen to eyewitnesses, but use cameras to help make up your mind. He made an analogy that FIFA does that in soccer. They use cameras to replay and see if they got it right. So you listen to the witnesses, but also get technology if you can to make your point, to prove your hypothesis. Keep your eyes on the ball, but not the audience. I don't care how many likes I get on Twitter. This is Avi. It's irrelevant. He's not on social media. He goes, if you listen to too many people, you'll reduce yourself to the lowest common denominator. The pretenders ignore the facts that don't agree with their models. Avoid mud wrestling because it will get you dirty. Yeah, it took me 6 years to learn that lesson on Twitter. Let's see. Now I have to try to make out what I thought I cleaned this up. Go to the heights of the scientific practice where the oxygen level is too high for your critics. In other words, like he said, don't get down in the dirt and argue with people. And without searching, you'll never find anything. So that was Avi. Thank you for that super chat money. I really appreciate that. Thanks to everybody, and if I'm ignoring your comments for the most part, I have one screen here, so I can't see everything. Once I put up the notes, I can't see everything. Um, all right, Beatrice Villaras from Sweden has a PhD in astronomy. This is something I had never heard about, and Micah Hanks published an article on her in the Debrief. You can look it up, but she talks about transients, which I had never heard about. So she's like, instead of waiting for a UFO, you can use a technique to search for them, and it'll help get rid of all human objects with this experiment. I don't know if she really explained in detail how she would do that, but so basically, there are short flashes of light associated with they believe to be non-human objects. So they want to minimize the number of false positives and actually get down to the real data. February, the articles in the brief. The goal is to search for a specific identifiable signature from an ET probe. And the search range, I forget the lower part, but the search range is up to 180 miles above the Earth. With SETI, where they're listening for radio signals, it's been 60 years and there's nothing so far. She didn't mention the WOW signal. Somebody just banged on the door. Hopefully, it's not for me being too loud. So they're searching for vanishing stars, which that means where in the 50s, I think she mentioned 1957, which is I don't know exactly when we had satellites, but this was done before we had satellites. So they take a picture of this photographic plate, and you see these objects there that don't really seem like they belong. And you check again, and those objects are gone. They're not there for very long. So she says 1950 or 60, they found flashes that appear and then disappear. In one picture, they found these 9 lights. They look like lights. 50 minutes later, they were gone in the next picture and they never appeared again. So it's transient, kind of like the phenomenon at Skinwalker Ranch. You never know when it's going to show up. So, what caused these, you know, marks, lights, whatever they are on the photo? They can't explain it in any astrophysical way. Was it an instrument issue? She went down the list of possibilities, problems with the instruments, and said on all of them, it's not this, and these are unlikely. And the skeptics were saying, how do you know? Oh, lost light. Skeptic says, how do you know that somebody didn't just sneeze on the plates, which is ridiculous? But, trying to talk about all theories. Maybe it was nuclear fallout from a nuclear test, and that's what's showing up on the picture. She looked, and they said none. There were no tests the year for this one picture. Are they reflections or emissions from a non-human satellite, or maybe a solar reflection? And the images are pre-Sputnik. Predicted signature of ET probes. This is I don't know what the hell this is. Multiple in a line from a rotating dish. Anyway, it's a paper that they wrote and it is accepted. At least so if you see at least 4 of these objects in a picture, she's said it's a good sign that it's transient. Um, and the top 2 candidates for this happening was August 6, 1954 and July 28, 1952. And she said, once you get a positive result, the mainstream journals get nervous because it doesn't even get to the review process. They're so against the possibility that these could be ET probes and unmanned probes. They're in our skies. They're up there. And she talks later. She wants to bring one down. I was like, what? And I'm thinking at first I was thinking craft with people, some being inside, but these are unmanned probes, they believe, if they're even probes. Unexplainable flashes that come in multiples aren't explainable. Um, New papers they're writing, it makes plate defects even less likely. That's one of the skeptical arguments. These are just defects in the plate. Um, is gravitational lensing an explanation for some of it? She's like, maybe, but not all. So they have a picture from 1952 on these photographic plates, and then 1991 they go to look and there's nothing there. So whatever was there is gone. And like I said, the skeptics will argue it was something prosaic, something wrong with the picture. I need to see the paper that she wrote or they wrote. And then one of the sightings happened around the time of the sightings over DC in 1952. Coincidence? Don't know. And she's like, "How can we test if it's related to non-human objects?" She thinks she thinks ET probes are very likely the answer for this. And we have 40 billion Earth-sized planets in the Milky Way. And she thinks these could be AI, controlled by AI, a non-human AI. Exoprobe is the name. I believe it's this new thing, a global network of, and the plan, I don't think they have the money for this, but it's a global network of wide field telescopes looking for flashes of about 1 second. That's 1 second. That's how fast they are. Other astronomers don't give a crap about this. They want to detect these objects, validate that they're actually objects, and then bring them down to Earth so we can see and study them. That would be amazing. This is brand new to me, so I'm not really sure how to take this. It was really interesting. She thinks they need professional equipment that they own. Don't go to like another telescope and rent out time. They'll never have enough time to do it. They need their own equipment and detect flashes in multiple telescopes. They're planning 3 observatories, and they want to stay outside of the atmosphere so there's no seagull argument, and probe the inner solar system. It's a new technique to filter away satellites and space debris. I believe this will be in one of the papers. Real-time spectroscopy. I'm saying it wrong, but whatever. And they're going to get more telescopes. They just need to raise the money. If it's successful, I hope we can find a company that can bring down the probe. And I don't care if the probe agrees with me or not. That's what she said. All right. So that's the first 2. I'll look. Hey, Christian, thanks for that. And thanks everybody for watching. I almost said, I'll just do it tomorrow, but I have enough energy to do this. I'm sorry if some of my notes are not clear. Yeah, I know the sneeze thing was a little ridiculous. I mean, there could be alternative explanations for what's on those photographic plates, but I need to read the let me just put that article there in the brief, which I don't know if I just didn't see or wasn't interested, but I didn't read it. It'll take 2 seconds. Here's the article in the debrief if anybody wants to read it. I still haven't read it because I got back like an hour ago. I should just read the highlights of my notes, but you know me, I can't just skip over stuff. All right, so Kevin Knuth didn't think I would like that. I did though. Nolan started out, he said, after reading Kevin's paper, I was stunned to learn of the energy requirements of anomalous objects. So Kevin Knuth, the physics of UAP. Because I'm skeptical of UFOs and scientists who just dismiss UFO. He goes, I'm skeptical of UFOs, and I'm also skeptical of scientists who just dismiss UFOs out of hand. They say, quote, it's not possible. We know our physics. And he's like, we don't know our physics. We don't have a quantum theory of gravity. Quantum mechanics should make a difference with gravity. What are UAP? Unidentified aerospace undersea phenomena. That's ambiguous. It just can't be anything because it's unidentified. And he says UAP are a class of phenomena, a class. The strategy? We need multiple independent, disparate pieces of evidence. Divide and conquer the extraordinary hypotheses. So divide and conquer the extraordinary hypotheses. We need more people to discuss these different hypotheses because there's so many we already know. He didn't claim to know what these are. And we need to remain agnostic, focus on the characteristics of these objects. And then he went through the 5 observables, Positive lift, instantaneous acceleration. The Tic Tac going from 28,000 feet to sea level in 0.78 seconds. He said that is crazy. And he said with the Tic Tac, their calculations showed that the acceleration was minimum 5,000 Gs. Um, and he said one craft would use 1,100 gigawatts of power. That's more than 10 times the total energy in the United States. And these objects are hypersonic, transmedium, low observability. Those are all part of the 5 observables. And I need to look up these cases, but some of them are new. He goes, but he said these types of cases are not new, and it's been known for a long time. Hermann Oberth, who was the German father of modern rocketry, in 1954, he gave a lecture on flying saucers, and he said he determined that this one was going 19 kilometers per second, which is 42,000 miles per hour. If that's true, I don't think we had that in 1954, as far as the black tech argument. He thought, or Oberth thought, if only 3 or 4 measurements of these objects, no big deal. He goes, but there were more than 50 measurements, so 50 different sightings of those types of crafts, and that was remember, again, 1954. And he mentions radar observations at Minot Minot Air Force Base in 1968, where a jet flew over the UFO. It was egg-shaped and looked like molten lava. Was pulling 9 Gs and going 9,000 miles per hour. And then 1986, the Japan Airlines case, which we know about, he just laughed, saying, it was 3 times the size of a 747. And the pilot said he could, when it was outside of his windshield, it just took up the entire front of the plane. So it's like, even if his observation was off by a little bit, I mean, it took up the entire windshield. 9,000 Gs. And I don't know specifically what he's referring to on that case, like as far as it taking off, shooting off. But he said they determined 9,000 Gs it was pulling and going 269,000 miles per hour. No sonic booms, no fireballs. He's like, how can a UFO suddenly stop? Where did all the energy go? There should have been an explosion. There should be an explosion when that happens. He said it's the same amount of energy of 250 Tomahawk missiles. And he treats all of this information as clues. He thinks we can get to nearby stars in less than a day if you're traveling as fast as some of these craft have been measured. And they don't land on the White House lawn or Central Park, since he doesn't like that White House lawn analogy. But they're bright. The luminosity, he focuses on luminosity in cases studied by Bruce Maccabee and Jacques Vallée, and they found the luminosity to be 2,000 to 30,000 megawatts coming off of a craft. He's like, who needs that kind of brightness? He's like, why do this? No idea of the purpose of such a thing, but maybe they just can't help it because it's the result of their propulsion system. What kind of people or beings can just waste energy like that? And the light doesn't illuminate like nearby clouds, so it's not a uniform light. And he talks about a UFO hovering overhead. And the engine on a car will stop and then start up again. He thinks it's a high electric field that ionizes the air, shorting out the spark plugs and distributor cap. Only 10% of cars that start again in the cars that in the cases they examined. And he said you can get rings around a UFO if you use a polarizing filter and take the picture. And he believes those rings represent a magnetic field around the craft. And he said pictures have been taken with that polarizing filter in place. I don't think he showed one. He talks about transmedium travel and how these craft have an affinity for water. And he talks about a Southland encounter in November 1986. And they did, and this one I really need to look out because he said they did daily exercises designed to draw USOs in from the Pacific Ocean. and they detected an 800-foot USO that closed 20 kilometers in 25 to 30 seconds. The ship lost all power, and they determined the USO speed was 1,500 to 3,000 miles per hour. And he said there's a conundrum. If a sonar can detect craft where it's bouncing this off the USO, they're bouncing something, the signal off the USO is giving something back. So that's how they detect it on sonar. But then the USO is not displacing water, so that doesn't make any sense to him. If it's putting something back, there's something physical there, then why is the physical object not displacing water? So that's confusing to him and everybody. We should be watching our oceans and other oceans in our solar system, and he's talking about places like Europa, one of Jupiter's largest moons, which has some believe has an ocean like or a body of water with life underneath the ice. I believe it's ice. Could be wrong. He says UAPX is trying, that's who he works for, one of the UFO groups, or I don't think he gets paid to work there, but he's with UAPX, and they're trying to figure out how to lure UFOs in to study or make contact. And he says Matthew Sidagis, and I'm pronouncing his name wrong, he realized that they seem to like nuclear energy, so Matthew developed a handheld nuclear fission reactor, and they're going to power their UFO observing equipment with that nuclear fission reactor, and maybe the UFOs will detect that and come down since they're so attracted to nuclear energy, which is kind of interesting and a creative way to try to bring them in. And then Nolan has a question: why do batteries drain at all? Different sites, whether it be Skinwalker or other places. And Kevin Knuth said he doesn't have any idea. We need to know what kind of batteries. Do they all drain similarly? And then a question from the audience: is there something to the power/propulsion that's tied to the radiation effect and injuries? In other words, are people getting injured because of the type of propulsion system these craft have? Knuth said, I don't know, several possibilities. Maybe they're warping space-time and you get a Doppler shift or blue shifting light into the ultraviolet or other frequencies, and you're hurting people because of that. But most objects on FLIR are cold. So, and then Avi Loeb jumped in and he said it would be useful to measure any gravitational perturbation. And Knuth said LIGO, which Lou mentioned as a way to, the one measurement we can measure all UFO stuff. And LIGO is the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory. Knuth says they will not share any data on UFO research, which is interesting. Didn't go further on that. This is probably the biggest takeaway from Knuth's lecture. He said the United States governments said to UAPX, they wanted to know, what are your capabilities for observing underwater? That question came up over and over. So there's some focus. Somebody knows there's a focus on underwater objects. And Knuth speculated that maybe electric fields are swamping the instruments and making them useless when they're trying to get measurements. And then Riz came up. Riz is a guy who teaches about simulation theory. I forget Riz's last name. He asked, is it getting more difficult or less difficult to publish papers on this and to present at a mainstream conference? And Avi Loeb said, a conference 1 year ago at Penn State, which was headed up by Jason Wright, they banned any UAP talk. He goes, Avi's like, they just want to hear and talk about radio signals. And he doesn't know where that thinking and hostility comes from. The more attention the subject gets, the more upset people in academia get, and the harder it is to publish. It's ridiculous. At some point, they're going to lose that battle. Knut's Canute says, they don't like it because you're taking attention away from their work. And then a question was, Lou was doing interviews and laid out his plan for disclosure, and they would approach academics. Were you ever approached? And Avi says, we hosted visits from folks in Arrow, and those visits were collegial. We got along with them. We shared what we were doing, and they never expressed any issues, only positive feedback from government. And that includes the letter they received from Space Command saying that meteor in 2014 was interstellar. And then Nolan asked a question to Beatrice, who had those alleged transient objects. And he asked, what's the predicted occurrence of these objects, transients? And she's like, it's rare. It's very rare. It's 10,000 times less than and I hopefully I get that right, 10,000 times less than when you see satellites or space debris. Unless you're looking for it specifically, you're going to miss it. And Canute said 10 to the minus 9 per square kilometer. And she's like, yes. Cindy Morrison from the Yale UFO Society asked, any scientific development that would make breaking news to wake up the people? And Canute said, I joke, but I think you're going to have a UFO land and drag an alien off of it on live TV. And then Avi Loeb said, there's just one way to end the debate. If the government does have something in their possession, they could just show it to us. And then Beatrice pointed out that if we have an alleged alien object in orbit, we can get other scientists to confirm it. That would go a long way, that people would respect multiple scientists saying there's an object up there. It's not anything we own or any other country. It has to be from somewhere else, from somebody else. Of course, it could be some previous civilization on our planet that put something up there, but I guess it depends when it shows up. And then Canute said, yeah, your work is like that. Others can confirm it. That's what we need. And we need mainstream people. And then somebody said, can you recommend a place to start as an overview for people who are, basically who are new to this? And Avi mentioned the book by Garrett Graff, which we've heard about in the media recently, which it ignores crash retrievals, but it could be a good starter book for people. Gives a broad overview of the history. Yeah, I met Ross today. It was good. And I'm sorry this is not visually exciting, but I mean, I could show you my notes, but that's about it. I'm sorry, I'm drinking water. Who else did I meet? Obviously, I met Gary Quick, Nolan off the bat, and I got to meet Ross. Hopefully, I get to hang out with him a little bit before this is over. I'm trying to think, and everybody else was mostly new to me, which was nice. Whitley was there. We'll get to his question. Strieber, just attending. I don't know what a Dragon UAP is. Oh, Christian mentioned that. Gary Nolan, up next. He said Grusch couldn't be here because of travel issues, which sucks. And he said, Nolan's lecture, what's inevitable? We're going to come across something out there that's alien. How do we engage it and begin? Everything is made of stardust. We don't understand the rules of how it all goes together. I think of potential UAP materials like I do with cancer research. It's just straightforward, analyze it. Obviously, somebody has an understanding of physics that we don't. They have a way of putting things together that we don't understand. And his lecture is entitled From Exobiology to Silicon and Biotech Valley. And he talks about the people he worked with early on in his career that worked on the Viking mission. And the short story is basically the technology that came from the Viking mission can be measured in billions and trillions of dollars in lives saved from that technology, and it all started with the question, "Are we alone?" And he said that Eric Davis, Hal Puthoff, Jacques Vallée, and Colm Kelleher rescued him from the rabbit hole of ufology he was going down at the time. And he showed a picture of what he sees himself as, and it was like an AI created, really good looking young scientist. It was kind of funny. How do we analyze UAP materials? Take them apart piece by piece. Treat it like it's something unusual. If something unusual is observed, evidence is collected in a crime scene. And the hypothesis is, if you've looked at any of the work he's done on the materials, they came allegedly like a craft is there, and all of a sudden it just drops this piece of material for whatever reason. So that's a lot of the objects he's studying are like that. It's a hovering object. Something seems to drop off of it and falls to the ground. In this one case in Council Bluffs, Iowa, which he wrote a paper with Larry Lemke, Vallée himself, and other authors. There were some witnesses in that case from Iowa that were 500 feet away. Police were called, left a big pool of metal that was cooling on the ground. I've read the paper. I'm not sure if it's available online for free. Somebody sent it to me. So what is it? What was that? What was the material? All prosaic possibilities were looked at and dismissed. And unlike what some people think, publishing the paper on it did not hurt anyone's reputation. He mentioned one guy who went on to get a job somewhere else. Didn't affect him at all. They took 5 pieces from the material on the ground, and the isotopic ratios looked normal, but the ratios of the elements were different from one sample to another. So it wasn't homogeneous. It was different, which is really weird. I shouldn't say that. He didn't say that. So it's not uniform throughout. He said that was interesting. It means that before it was dumped there, it was incompletely mixed. The speculation is, were they offloading something that was problematic on the craft? This is garbage. We don't need that. Get rid of it. And now the craft can operate properly. Speculation. The completely different ratios from one sample to another. What can we conclude? Clearly, it's the result of an industrial process. It's incomplete mixing. And can we look deeper? What if the tech is on the nano or atomic scale? So then they used atomic probe tomography. Takes the sample apart atom by atom, and figures out this 3D placement. You get a map of where things are. The sample was 2 to 3 microns cubed. It's pretty small. It's not industrial steel. And you get to see with this atomic probe tomography, you get to see the potential structure, and you can use this for other samples going forward. He said this early on. This is like the baseline. There's going to be better materials, better samples going forward. This was just to show how you do this with this type of equipment. And he mentions one bismuth magnesium sample. I think this might be the Linda Moulton Howe sample that DeLong bought from her via TTSA. They were testing it, but it fell apart when they tried to test it. But they're going to do it again. They have other pieces. So I'm really curious to see what that one shows. Anything anomalous. He said he's not an expert yet in atomic probe tomography, but he will be. Materials show no sign of technology, but the material is clearly the result of an industrial process. Why? Why generate that and then dump it in the middle of a field in Iowa? And he goes on to Ubatuba, which was in the 50s. 1957 was the most cited date. The primary witness was a Brazilian journalist. Apparently, again, this was dropped from a UFO. It was supposed to be pure magnesium, but what Nolan received was not exactly pure. And the analysis with the mass spectrometer They had 2 samples. One sample had normal ratios, the other sample did not. Why? Why change ratios in 1957 when it would be extraordinarily expensive to make? And humans had no reason to change the ratios. Why play with the isotopes? Back then, nobody would even think about doing that. Now, he said, yeah, you would make changes to make a better catalyst. I don't really understand what he means there. He said pharmaceutical companies are starting to realize this, and there's something there to be understood. He said we need more samples, and then he said, I'll be like Lou and Chris sneaking something out the back, meaning the videos, gimbal, go fast. He said Chris is gonna kill me for saying that. I think he may have said Lou too. Material is clearly the result of an industrial process. But why was silicon being thrown around a beach in Brazil? It had an unusual level of pure silicon with the contaminants. Why? Every time they offload something, it's different. And then he brought up a case which I did not know they had studied material, the Socorro Lonnie Zamora case, which I think was 1964. Anyway, Zamora sees an object and saw it landed, and then it took off. They analyzed something that was left at the site. Don't know if it was a piece of the craft. They weren't sure about that. And in that sample, the contaminants are what's interesting. The aluminum is incredibly pure. Who does that and why? And it was attached to zinc with aluminum in it, but it's not uniformly distributed. Why? Clear signs of engineering, clearly a result of an industrial process. It had an unusual level of pure silicon with contaminants that are inappropriately distributed. And there are many kinds of atomic imaging. I don't know what that means. He says there's a new effort. He's calling it the Stardust Repository. Everything is made of stardust. And he wants to standardize testing with a federation of labs and analysis tools and do some deep vetting to make sure they're not getting junk samples. It'll be organized under a public umbrella operation. He wants to standardize it and put out protocols so others can do it. It'll be funded by gifts and grants and wants to make the data freely available at once or after the owner writes a paper, but the most people will have to wait is 1 to 2 years. And he says he's not a metallurgist. He goes, but others with expertise in various fields have offered to help. That is it for Gary Nolan. They didn't talk about Kirkpatrick. We'll see tomorrow if anybody asks about that. I have speculation, but I did not ask about. I didn't ask any questions because I was sitting there taking notes. Hello, everybody who's saying hello. Disarray. All right, Valet. Valet started out by saying, it's wonderful to see science take on questions like these. We just had to wait 65 years for it to happen. And he laughed. He studied at the Institute for Plasma Research under Peter Sturrock in 1972. He said a lot more about that, but I couldn't keep up with him. Peter Sturrock, if you look him up, he wrote a book about UFOs, a scientist from Stanford. If you just type in Peter Sturrock and look up news articles, you'll see the media covered it back then. I forget the date when it was. And he talks about Clinton with his science advisor, Jack Gibbons, who was Clinton's science advisor from 1993 to 1998, and Gibbons was a physicist and an atomist. Gibbons was in that position as the science advisor to Clinton when Lawrence Rockefeller suggested to Clinton and I don't know if LA has talked about this, it was new to me, but Rockefeller, and I knew about Jack Gibbons, but this I didn't know. Rockefeller suggested to Clinton to remove the secrecy and stigma that surrounded the UFO program in the US. I knew that. And UFOs were a political problem. So this I didn't know. Valet got to hear Gibbons in Silicon Valley speaking at a keynote address, and Gibbons took questions. Somebody asked him, "How do you advise the president when Rockefeller wants him to reveal the reality of UFOs?" This was at the American Association of Advancement of Science. So it was in front of scientists. So Gibbons laughed and gave a deep and silent pause. And Gibbons said he would not answer in place of the White House, but he could tell a short story that would summarize his personal situation. And this is the story we heard the other day. Gibbons said there was a story about an older man who goes home at night. He detects this light coming from the ground, and it turns out to be a frog wearing a golden crown, and the light emanating from the crown. The frog starts talking to him and explains that he's a young, wealthy princess turned into a frog. The frog says, "Kiss me, and I will turn back into that princess." And the old man says, "At my age, I'd rather have a talking frog." And Valet says, "It's funny, but that's the most clear explanation I've ever heard at the highest level regarding the status of UFO disclosure." I take that as meaning just leave things the way they are, status quo. They're afraid. And we'll get a little more of that later in Puthoff. They're afraid of what disclosure could cause. Right now is not great, but you don't know what's going to come if full disclosure comes. At least that's the way I took that story. And then let's see. 1973, CNS, the French space agency, had an interest in UFOs, and they talked about, I don't need to tell you that. It's the percentage of UFOs that are, unresolved, 2%, 10%. It changes by how much, work you put into trying to resolve the cases. But he talks about, not sure of the date, but 1943, there was this retired Army officer who looked for German subs off the coast, the East Coast. He lived there in Massachusetts, and detected complexity of statistics. And this guy disagreed with us in the UFO world. He said ufology has a problem backwards. In his position, if 2% of the objects they detected were German subs, that would be really serious. Apply the same discipline to UFOs. And the officer said 98% explainable were probably given to me by the enemy and all cost the same. The 2%, which were the German subs, would kill me and would cost a lot more. And detecting the 2% is going to be difficult. That's what we face today. Can't We can't leave UFOs unexplained forever. Not only are private citizens reporting these, but governments are seeing these more and more. The excuse that they're just illusions or other excuses can't be used anymore. Of course they are, but that's going to go away, he believes. Why is this such a mystery still for the Pentagon? Then he talks about how the observer of a UFO sighting would report their sighting more if this happened, less if this happened. So more if it's just real basic sighting, you see something in the sky real quick, they're not going to report it. But if it's a really good sighting, especially if they have some sort of physiological effects, it's going to be reported. If they see a luminous body with complex shapes and displacement, a spear in the sky that's flying against the wind, more people are going to report it. These are different levels: level 1, level 2, level 3. Level 3 is an orange globe following you, or a luminous object that looks like an airplane had crashed, or an object above your car, your engine dies, or a flotilla of lights goes across the sky with a trail, or something buzzes an aircraft carrier. You'll find cases like that in police reports, and they'll wind up in files of concerned agencies like CNS in France or the Pentagon. Level 4, if an object overcomes your car on the highway, maybe not reported to the Air Force, and that doesn't make sense. Obviously, Air Force, I'm confused on that one, but it could be reported to police or local journalists. But then you get into 5. People will report a lot of what I just described, but level 5, you get a creature coming out of an object, and the witness may report communication or temporary paralysis. An official report will be filed almost 0% of the times. People don't want to be embarrassed. He has his cases are filled with cases like that over the years. He says he doesn't need U.S. government approval to study. Experienced ufologists will tell you there's level 6 and 7, which is very rarely considered by the military or journalists and not reported. Abductions fall into that category. Current analysis methods are insufficient. Military analysis teaches us a lot. I'm sorry, that's incomplete. We learned a lot from the specialized equipment from the Nimitz. How many cases are not reported? So if you just dump all of this UFO data into an AI engine, it's not going to solve the problem of what UFOs are. It doesn't work when you can't define what the problem is. We don't even know. That comes after serious investigation with boots on the ground. We may get a solution if we put some of the level 6 and 7 strange cases in there, but that's somewhere down the line. The one interesting thing he said, going forward, the most strange cases, level 6 and 7, abductions and stuff like that, that's where Valet wants to spend the most of his time going forward. And like I said, percentage of cases that are reported, it varies with how strange it is. The highest percentage reported are when they see something clear, but it doesn't threaten the witness's mental stability like 6 and 7. And Nolan said, and Valet ended by saying it's time for major companies, I may have gotten that wrong, but to open their real files widely to the scientific community. And Nolan said, somebody asked Nolan what would he suggest for people to study who are interested in this, and he said material science. And then Valet brought up working with Hynek and the Air Force, and they came up with a very boring questionnaire. And he said, we need a simple AI machine going through each of the steps and to consider every applicable hypothesis. Second, we need an understanding the nature of the phenomenon. He said, second is understanding the nature of the phenomenon. That's the tougher question. It's going to take longer. And then Leslie Kane asked about the Socorro sample, which none of us had ever heard about. Nolan said they scraped off a small piece of whatever that was. It was at the site of Socorro with Lonnie Zamora. And it's layered and completely, it's layered, which was completely unexpected. Something dropped off the craft, and whatever it was there at the site. They didn't have a specific explanation for it. But Valet said Hynek was there in Socorro. This is interesting. I never heard this before. There was an officer at White Sands who was driving through the desert, and he saw an object that would be on the trajectory that the Socorro craft would have followed on that day. His car died. His radio didn't work. This was never published, but it was recorded by different journalists. This guy was in charge of the mechanics at this base at White Sands, and his car was taken apart after that event to be studied. The object was very luminous, and Valet thinks that clinches the entire Lonnie Zamora case, because he thinks what that guy saw in the sky was the same object that Zamora saw on the ground that took off. But I need more details, really. There wasn't that many details. Another question from the audience. In Forbidden Science, Volume 5, you mentioned the Blue Border Legacy Special Access Program. What is that? Valet says, I don't want to talk about anything classified in this lecture. but I went to DC and briefed folks in the Senate who had questions like that. That's all he said. Jesse Michaels, who did the Grusch documentary, said, "What's your model of time? Does it feature retro causality?" And Valet said, "There are a number of people who have come up with things that could explain the absurdity and recursivity, which means it can repeat itself over and over, of many of the experiencers' experiences related to time." He said, in these cases, you'll find paranormal and parapsychological effects, dreams that manifest. Some of what is reported sounds crazy, and you can explain some of the time effects in those cases. I know that's not a great note-taking job by me, but all right, that was it for Valet. Let's see. I don't know what that means. The government isn't our daddy, so I don't know what you said earlier. Let's see. If you have a specific thing, put it again. I'll try to comment if I see it. Pasulka up next. And Nolan said that Diana was the first entry for me into the non-material world and the esoteric. He said, "We've gone out together into the desert in blindfolds because the person who took us didn't want us to know where we were going. One of the more remarkable trips I ever took." That was Nolan introducing her. And she goes, "That's ironic because it's not necessarily the non-material side of it because I did take you to a crash retrieval site, allegedly." And she spoke about the rewriting of the myth of Prometheus and started off by saying, "I'm going to use UFOs and UAP interchangeably because Jay Stratton is not here, so I think I can get away with it." Since the mid 20th century, there have been roughly four traditions related to UFOs. Of course, I don't have all four because I missed it. Paper she recently, I want to see this paper. She wrote a paper for Oxford and it was peer reviewed by someone on Avi's team. She goes, "Which may be horrifying to you, Avi." I didn't hear if he responded. She goes, "It's a history of this research that she does." Leslie Kane helped with it, and so did the folks in the Invisible College and the Visible College. She goes, "There's a compartmentalization in academia. In UAPs and UFOs, it's extreme, and it's because of stigma and national security. In academia, the compartmentalization is people in astrobiology, as an example, they're unaware of what people are doing in the public realm of UFO research, and vice versa. We don't know what those folks are doing, but it's necessary for researchers to learn from each other." Diana feels vindicated for being asked to speak at Seoul. With her Catholic history and all the work she didn't receive pushback on that work. But when she studied UFOs, she went through a couple of years of, quote, "a gauntlet of hatred" from people reacting to what she was working on. And then she goes into Prometheus, which is about a story, a myth that's 2,700 years old, maybe a lot older. Talks about human interaction with non-human intelligence and human beings given technology by a non-human intelligence. And then that tech, from that information, the human is taking it and turning it into actual real world technology based on the information shared by the non-human source. And Prometheus is a proto god who created humans from clay and stole fire from the gods and gave it to humans. Unfortunately, the humans used the technology to destroy each other, and Prometheus was punished with eternal punishment, basically because humans got the tech and screwed it up. That's basically the myth. And she goes on to say some people think they're in contact with angelic beings. Jack Parson thought he was in contact with something, but it wasn't an angelic being. And she asked folks at NASA if they knew about Jack Parsons. And they did, but they didn't like to talk about it or publicize it. If you can get a hold of Strange Angel, it's a two-season miniseries on Parsons. It's good. The book is better. I think there's a book called Strange Angel, which I have. I think that's the name of it. But she said some of these scientists get their tech from that kind of contact, interacting with this non-human intelligence. They're embarrassed to admit it. Um, she said, "I didn't look to find out about UFOs. I stumbled across it in my research on religion and myth. I went to New Mexico with Gary and Tim Taylor." She doesn't mention his name in the lecture. She still uses his pseudonym. Um, but she was informed that it was a UFO crash site that wasn't Roswell. It's one of the many crash sites that exist, allegedly, of course. And the two scientists, I don't remember the story from the book, but two scientists, I think, who brought her there, they had no doubt that this had happened as far as crashes. And they thought it was a donation site. They called it that because they believed the intelligence that put the vehicles there, put them there purposely for humankind's benefit, just like the Prometheus myth. And these folks were given reverence to this site, all about acquiring tech from a non-human intelligence. She said, public scholarship of UAPs, ufology. Historically, the first ufologists were folks like James McDonald. Um, his book by, I forget her name. It's called Firestorm and Druffle. It's a real. I've skimmed through it. It's got some really good stuff in there. I think it's going to be one of my must-read recommendation books. Um, ufology back then, ufologist, a term was a respectable label back then. You had physicist ufologists. I mean, we got the close encounter criteria back then. It was inspired and influenced by the intel community, the visible research tradition. I don't know what the hell that means. Some of the highlights of the public-facing ufology is Passport to Magonia, which is a record of historical sightings of aerial objects. It reads similar to a book in Diana Pasulka's field. People back then in the old days, when Diana did her studies, were confronted by an orb or an aerial object, and many of those folks back then interpreted it as a soul from purgatory. John Mack wrote Passport to the Cosmos, his last book, and she thinks that's probably a reference to Vallee's Passport to Magonia, focused on the experiences of people who saw craft and beings found to be as psychologically as normal as anybody else. And she mentions a book called The Impact of Discovering Life Beyond Earth by Stephen Dick. And he said if we meet a non-human intelligence, it's going to be post-biological. He assumed it would be AI. He said this 20 years ago. And she works with a group, quantum computing group that deals with AI. And they don't think we'll be able to communicate with these AIs. It brings up the incommensurability problem, which is basically I looked for a definition. I kind of know what it is, but it's lacking a basis of comparison in respect to a quality normally subject to comparison. It's really hard to compare the two things. So whatever this AI, non-human intelligence, it's just so different. It's really hard to compare and hard to communicate. And you mentioned how Tim Taylor is a mission controller who works in the US space program, and the Vatican research they did together correlated places where miracles took place that were also the same places where there were UFO hotspots, which is interesting. So it was a UFO hotspot, and they also had miracles take place in those areas. According to her, they proved a correlation. And what's going on now with all of this stuff with Grusch and everything right now, she calls it, her group calls it an emergent phenomenon. It's rising, developing, and becoming apparent. And then we've still got a lot to go. Yeah, I don't know whose fault the secrecy is. I mean, obviously, the others, whatever they are, can end at any time they want, just show up during the day at a well-attended sporting event this Sunday, but the government could also do it if the government has what we think they have. So, yeah, blame on both, but they could both end the secrecy. And Peter Scoffish, his lecture was tough. It was called Conceptualizing NHI, Anthropomorphism and Ontology. Really quick, I didn't take a lot of notes because he was mostly reading an essay and it was just hard. It was almost impossible to take notes for me. Uh, Schumer, Senator Schumer has brought UAP further into the public discourse. It has taken the terminology and made it a matter of significance to Congress and the office of the president. What is supposed to be myth may be real, and it raises an ontological problem. Who or what is this that operates them? And I think this is really a great essay to read. It was tougher to follow as he was reading it, but to actually read it, I would like to read it. Um, who or what is operating these craft or objects or phenomena? Is it threatening? Is it beneficial? But if Majority Leader Schumer can write legislation about it, nobody should feel embarrassed by talking about it. Despite the lack of social consensus that UAP are physical objects, he assumes for the talk he gave that they are. And we're conceiving both NHI and UAP through categories and it leads to an anthropomorphic loop. We're looking at everything through the eyes of a human, which we have no other way of looking at them, obviously. Do we even have the right concepts to make sense of this all? The problem is not that the witnesses are not witnessing objects that appear to be technological. It's the idea that people think UAP are only technological machines when in fact they may be part biological and possibly involving thought. And then they had the question and answer of Peter and I forget who else was up with him. I think it might have been Nolan. And Peter said, "Don't reject data just because it disagrees with your ideas." And then Whitley Strieber got up and said, he said, "There's enormous amount of data with close encounter cases, and that includes physical data related to the bodies and the minds of the experiencers. I see across the whole community absolutely large amount of resistance to dealing with this experiencers. Can we create a set of standards that would be relatable to academics and scientists so they can find a way into this? We don't know if there's a physical," and Whitley says, "We don't know if there's a physical relationship between UAP and experiencers that hasn't been established. Could be a cultural phenomenon." So Scoffish says, "I don't think you can establish academic standards. It requires a cosmological shift first for us to deal with it. You're someone who has attempted to initiate that shift, but the academic shift will follow the cultural and cosmological shift. So it's going to have to happen before the academics will take it seriously if the culture finally accepts this as being real." I'm not sure if I agree with that because if we can prove to the satisfaction of the masses that we have craft and bodies, I think they're going to be a lot open, and this includes the academic world. They'll be a lot more open to experiencers because if you have craft and bodies, the next step isn't very far. It's not much of a leap as it is right now. But Strieber heard his answer and said, "That's disappointing." And then somebody asked about Native American, and I think Diana Pasulka agreed with Scoffish, said, "Yeah, same type of answer." But Native American stories about non-human intelligence that was brought up, and Scoffish said, and there's somebody on Twitter, I don't have his handle handy. Mike, his name is, I think Mike Jameson. Scoffish said, "Artie Six Killer Clark is completely ignored." That's true. She has 5,000 plus accounts of encounters by Native Americans and others, and these cases look completely different than anything else you can read. They have lucidity and presence on behalf of the Native people having the experiences. It's as if they're not being socialized and not making a distinction between the invisible and the visible. That makes it easier for Native Americans to accept their experiences. And then somebody says, we hear the reason for no disclosure is because people can't handle it. So, in your opinion, if we have full disclosure, will it be zombie apocalypse? Or will it be, we welcome our alien overlords? Where's our lunch? And then Pasolka says, neither. He goes, I think religious people won't lose their faith. But if people are controlling us, are you talking about something like Plato's cave? She goes, but that wasn't a zombie apocalypse. And then she thinks, and she basically says, never mind. It's like, it was kind of funny. You have to, when the lecture comes out, you'll have to interpret it yourself. My question is always, if we're dealing with something that created us for their benefit to use us, I think that's going to affect everybody, including religious people. They may reject it and don't believe it, especially if these beings actually had a hand in creating us. I don't know how that would go over. And then Scoffish said, nobody's asking the questions, basically. He goes, this has been going on for 6 years now. Yeah, people just don't have the interest yet. And then this is the last one. Thank God. I have to go to sleep. I'm sorry. Leslie, Larry McGuire from Canada, and Hal Puthoff. And then Leslie Keene was kind of glowing over Hal in the beginning. She said, I could always call Hal and he always had this grounded wisdom about him and clarity and knowledge. I know there was some murmurs from people saying that she's a journalist. She shouldn't be so glowing over him. And I do understand that thinking. Try to remain unbiased unbiased. So Hal says, back in the 60s, we had Sign, Grudge, and Blue Book. In 69, Blue Book shut down after recommendations by Condon. The Air Force would tell you they gave up studying UFOs in 1969, but the Bolander memo says they would continue with any UFO study that's related to national security. So Project Blue Book didn't die. It just went out of sight. So, and I think this is in Valet's book. He said he was contacted by, it's interesting. The most interesting part of the day, I think. He said they were contacted, or he was contacted, Hal was, by a CEO of a think tank in Washington, D.C. a couple of decades ago. And he said, hey, come participate in this conference. He goes, but I can't tell you what it's about. But if you come, you will consider it the most important thing you've ever done. So Puthoff goes, 15 to 20 people, featuring the military, the CIA, the DIA, businessmen. They make up these 15 to 20 people. And when he gets there, Hal's told the conference is about whether or not to disclose the reality of UFOs to the American people. And they said, let's start out. This is what they told the people at the conference. Let's start out and assume that there have been crash retrievals from Russia, China. They have their crash retrievals. Can we bring this out to the public? And we want to rate the impact of various things from positive to negative. How will it affect stocks, the stock market, religion, politics? He said it was a really long list. What happens if Corporation A has access to crash retrieval materials and Corporation B doesn't? And then B will wind up suing A and sue the government. Lou has spoken about this. And so they broke up into groups. His group, they ended up with a negative number, not in favor of disclosure. And that was, a negative number, but the group he was in, they were made up of folks who were positive on disclosure, but when they got down to it, it came out to be not ruling in favor of disclosure. In fact, every group came up with a negative number. And the problem basically was there's so many areas to handle, and there's no way to handle them all at the same time. Therefore, we all recommend that we do not go forward with this. Well, that was the recommendation at the top after they looked at all of their individual group recommendations. And Hal was like, "Yeah, we were disappointed. We started out thinking when we got there that it was a good thing to do, but afterwards we changed our minds." So you can blame Puthoff for no disclosure. I'm only kidding. But that's an interesting story, and I don't know how much things have changed since then. Fast forward to 2008, and you had Harry Reid, Inoue, and Stevens, who Puthoff reminds us they were all part of the Gang of Eight. So they probably had some background that this was a good idea, starting the OSAP program. So they told the DIA to start it. The DIA requirements were, they want to know where they're coming from, intent, but that wasn't as big as an interest as number two. They wanted to know what other countries are interested in it, and if they get a hold of this technology, will they be able to leap ahead of us? And Hal thinks they must have known something to make up the list of DIRDs that they came up with, the 38 DIRDs, which were lift, propulsion, power generation, all these papers, space-time materials, signature reduction, human effects, human interface. And Hal says, we thought maybe other countries do have materials. So his job was to get those materials from either companies or parts of the government that had them, allegedly, get the materials so OSAP could study them. But it was so compartmentalized. He said they couldn't do it. He said some folks had, in their corporations or wherever, had in the basement of the companies where this stuff was hidden. And they wanted to bring it out to the main part of the company, but they couldn't do that. Same problem, compartmentalization and classified, blah, blah, blah. And they even offered a way through the front door where these places could give it to OSAP and they wouldn't tell anybody where it was from. They would provide them cover. That didn't entice them. And the last plan was, let's go to instead of that, we'll just go to all these experts and have them write papers on, and tell us what your field would be in the next, I think 2050 was it, or 50 years ahead in the future. And then he goes through all the dirge, and that's what they wound up doing. They didn't get the materials, and they published it on JWIX, which is the in-house top secret place where you could publish top secret and sensitive government papers and stuff. And those were extremely popular papers. And Hal was worried that these authors later would find out, because they weren't told it was about UFOs. He was worried they would say, "Oh my God, you didn't tell us this was related to UFOs." But he never got that pushback. And he says those papers turned out to be almost as good as if they would have been able to share the materials to be analyzed. I don't know if I believe that, but now he says, now we have David Grusch saying we have materials, craft, and bodies. He's not the only one. Jim Lacatski, who ran OSAP, he also talked about craft in the new Knapp Kelleher Lacatski book, Initial Revelations. And Lacatski said, basically, we have craft of unknown origin and we've gotten inside of it. He said that in 2011, where they had a meeting at the Capitol with a senator. It was a deputy Department of Defense person. Anyway, Puthoff says, we have all these reasons to take this seriously and expect something is going to come out in the public. With the Schumer amendment, I can't believe it. That's what he said. Non-human intelligence, that appears over 20 times in the legislation. If that passes, things will move forward at a relatively rapid clip. And I've heard mixed things about whether or not that will pass. It's mixed right now. What aspects will pass, eminent domain, the whole thing, I don't know. But even if it passes, Hal says we'll still have the problems we discussed at that conference a few decades ago. And these companies are not going to want to give up their tech. The places that have this said, if we can have control, we'll do it. I'm not sure exactly who he's talking about, if he's talking about back then. And an IRAD, which we've talked about, Mellon's talked about, is a way of doing that. You're basically funded by the government, but the company owns everything. They're going to have to work all this out related to the Schumer amendment. He goes, but we're on the right track. And then Larry Maguire, who's in the Canadian Parliament, military, I think MP is, I forget, I'm sorry. He says, I'm not going to try to compete with Hal. I'm just honored to be here. Um, I have stuff in common with Avi Loeb. We both came from farms. That's where the similarities end. Uh, it says Valet talked about the energy. Gibbons, advisor to President Clinton. McGuire came with two people from his office, and he told them to wave. And he says, my friends handed me the frog, and I have 2 children and 7 grandchildren, so I handed the frog back. Not really sure what he was trying to say there. He goes, I usually try to make change. I want to commend the Soul Foundation for trying to make this more. He goes, we're trying to make this more public in Canada. What are the Canadian politicians thinking? What can be done in the Canadian Parliament? Are they thinking about it? And he says, usually, and he doesn't put himself in this department or category for the most part. He says, usually politicians are inherently resistant to risk. If one is willing to ask questions, they should be applauded. And he says, go home and take a few minutes and thank the people in your government who are speaking out about this. He says, everyone deserves honest answers, and now we need to figure out what this is. Who should take the lead? We should be asking folks in government to do something outside of their normal mission. I asked Canada's chief science advisor, who right now is Dr. Mona Namir. He asked her to take this on. The Canadian program is called Sky Canada. Even our own folks in government aren't engaging as much as I'd like. Breaking down stigma will take time. He said it's hard to compel the members of the Canadian Parliament to do anything because these guys in Parliament don't have access to classified information, unlike our representatives, some of them. So the way they learn about this is via leaks, talking to people, and doing their own legwork. In California, their executive branch writes the bills and spends the money, unlike here where it's our legislative branch. So we can only ask questions and hope they take our recommendations. Our caucus is clear that we should be working with American allies to determine the origin and intent of UAP. He said, go get a chief scientist report tabled and then conduct a real study, and we're doing our best to compel those who know a lot more to reveal what they legally can to our parliamentary committee. Good luck with that. If they don't have access to classified information, I don't know how they're going to do that. I think he said the governor general. Didn't hear the right word. I think it was governor general can see if the money is being used properly. Are the folks in the Canadian Parliament paying attention? He said citizens are not banging down our doors to demand UAP transparency. I think it's the same here. I mean, yeah, our group will contact members of Congress, our representatives, but overall, most people don't care about this, right? Still, he goes, even with Grusch's testimony, there still isn't anything concrete for most politicians to grab onto. It will fall on deaf ears if we don't have a way to get that information out. We need to be prepared if somebody comes forward with information that shows we have unknown material or technology, and figure out the best way to declassify and reveal it. He said he thinks the Schumer amendment was intended to take pressure off of the president, Biden. And when we see the 9 people that are elected or appointed to the 9 for the disclosure panel group, he goes, that's going to tell you the direction they want to go. I mean, if you think they put a sociologist on the panel, if you look at the list of type of people who are going to be on the panel of 9, one of them is a sociologist. He goes, if you think they put a sociologist on the panel to reveal prosaic answers, you have poor analytical skills. And obviously, we have to keep certain information away from our adversaries, but to study this, he thinks that they need to involve civilian scientists, academics, and researchers. And as a policymaker, we need to tap their expertise. The most sensitive problem is this: how does government admit to citizens that they haven't been told the truth? Right now, the public trust in government is already abysmally low. This might be the right time to try to turn that around. It's never too late. And that's how he ended his lecture. So Leslie Kean says, you don't have access to classified information. How much is that a problem? He says we wanted to make sure defense ministers and science ministers knew and were briefed on it. At first, we weren't sure if they were. Now, we know that they are. We know they want to look into it, but we need the committee to approve them being able to study it. How do you get both countries to work together? He says, in Canada, with the committee structure we can invite some of the folks in this room in the Seoul conference to testify to those committees. That would blow the cork out of the bottle. Canadians know about this a little bit, but they're not like you said, they're not beating down our door on this, citizens. At one point, our emails were pretty full for a while. And he said he grew up north of Minot Air Force Base in North Dakota. That's where one of the nuclear missile cases where the nukes were shut off, taken offline. And then Puthoff says, I can see Canada and U.S. working together. And he tells a story about Ed Teller, who years ago was speaking about secrecy. This is interesting: secrecy versus non-secrecy and disclosure. And Teller said, in the atomic era, Russia and the US developed their atomic bombs secretly on their own, separate from each other. It was all classified. And basically, we stayed on the same level as each other. Nobody got ahead of each other. He said, but in electronics, we didn't classify that. And we wound up getting way ahead of the Russians. In other words, he's saying declassify, and if you go by the way electronics were, we should take the lead in UAP science. That's his argument for disclosure. And Larry McGuire said, we can meet with your Congress to share information, hopefully next year. Hal Puthoff, I don't think the toothpaste will be put back in the tube. So whistleblowers will come forward and discuss things with the Senate. And he said there's going to be a broader realization that there's something to this and it needs to be addressed. So the policy and plans need to be formatted. McGuire, the science chief and House of Commons are paying attention. Your hearing with Grusch and Fravor and Graves, who was there, by the way, today. I didn't meet him. I met Alex Dietrich, though. Your hearing opened up a whole can of knowledge around this. If this is happening, why are we back at the Ark? He's making a reference to how Canada is back, way back. They're behind the times on this. But your hearing allowed us to be aggressive, if not progressive, to educate the public. The best way to do this is work with our American counterparts. And then Hal was asked by Leslie if he knew about what was going on back in 2011. What Lacatski said, we had access to a craft. We got on the inside. Did Hal know about that? Because Hal worked in OSAP under Lacatski. Did Hal know about that all these years? And Hal said what Lacatski said about us having a craft and gaining access to it. He goes, he knows Lacatski well enough. He goes, I know I can take that to the bank. He goes, after I saw that in the book, I called Lacatski. He said he had been approved by DOPSR and what you see in the book is all he's gonna say. And Hal's like, "Jim, won't you give me a little background?" Lacatski, "Nope, I have no knowledge." Oh, and Lacatski said, "Nope," and then Hal's like, "I had no knowledge of it, and I was shocked to see it in the book." We had close to a decade at the top secret SCI clearance level, and Lacatski didn't say a word to me about it. So then I contacted Calm, and I said, "Calm, Kelleher, can you tell me?" And Kelleher said, "Nope, I won't tell you either." So that single statement is all we know or have heard. So I talked to people afterwards, and they're like, "Do you believe Hal?" I'm like, I mean, I didn't sense that he was lying. Sounded like this is what happened, but you know, he works in Intel. You never know, but he said he didn't know. Regarding Grusch, Hal, I've known David Grusch for some time, and we've been in various technical meetings together. And I know what the required acuity is to be part of the NGA and the NRO. You don't get in those positions if you're woolly headed. In other words, you need to be smart. Quote, I accept what David Grusch says and I take it to the bank as well. So he takes what Lacatski says about us having a craft and gaining entry to it, takes that to the bank, and he takes what Grusch has said. And Grusch has spoken about crash retrievals and bodies, but more crash retrievals. McGuire, again, Grusch's hearing testimony had an impact on Canada. And then Hal closes by saying, Canadian George Hathaway, we've worked with him. He has a laboratory in Toronto where we went, and then he came to Austin and worked in our lab. And Hathaway wrote two of the DIRDs, and he was effective at generating funding sources. And then the last thing, Leslie Kane brings up the Larry McGuire letter that leaked. And then, Knapp and Corbell did a show on it. And McGuire says, it's amazing how things get leaked. He goes, I just wanted to know, by writing that letter, I just wanted to know what was going on in our country and to be a lot more aware of the implications and benefits to working with our strongest ally. We wait, we await the response result. I hope they went back and took a hard look at that, meaning the folks in his country. It never hurts to poke the bear and let them know you're watching. The end. Oh my God, 12:18. We have 55. It's not bad this late at night. I'm sorry if I'm missing your questions. I wanted to do that for you guys. Yeah, thanks, Jeff. I don't know if I'll do it tomorrow night. I will do it though. I don't know if I'll wait till the next day. Depends on what happens, but I'm gonna do my best to take notes. Some of it was challenging. Um, but I think I did an okay job. Some stuff, like I said, was just tough to take notes on. Depends on how the person lectures. Anyway, I gotta go to sleep. All right. Hopefully, I'll see you tomorrow. If not, the next day, but I will definitely update the second day. Um, and Carl Nell is the highlight. I did speak with Carl Nell today. So nice. I mean, the guy spent his life in military, and you'd think he'd be like a hardened guy. Thanks, someone. Um, he was super nice, so nice. And I talked to him about Eric Davis. I said, I know Eric, and he speaks highly of you. And he's like, how do you know Eric? And I told him the story of how we met. And I said, I gotta ask, the rumors that you're gonna head up Arrow. He said, don't believe everything you read. And to me, that means absolutely nothing. I mean, if he was being considered, he can't say anything. So his lecture tomorrow about the Schumer Amendment is going to be really interesting. And I will see you tomorrow or the day after. I will see you again soon to update you on day 2. And Chris Mellon is tomorrow. Lou wasn't there today. He will not be there tomorrow. We were told Grusch is not going to be here this weekend, which is disappointing. We'll see who the special guest speaker who is listed. There's 2 people that I've never heard about. and that should be interesting. And McCullough, yes, Colnell and McCullough, those are the 2 people I really wanna hear tomorrow, and see if Mellon throws any surprises in there. See you guys later. Thanks for watching.